Happy Labor Day. Sure doesn't seem like Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day.
It did last night with all the fireworks I heard going off in my neighborhood, though.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Is fireworks a traditional Labor Day thing?
I guess.
I didn't think so, but they were doing them around my house last night,
Really?
too, and it was really odd.
Well, and the crazy thing was, I decided that last night was a really great night to watch Generation Kill on HBO. And I was episode 3 in, and then the fireworks are going off. I was like, this is a bad idea. I should watch something else.
Right.
Hi, Heath.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How's everybody?
Hi, Heath. I'm Todd. Good to meet you.
Hi, Todd.
Hey, Heath, I'm Patty. We talked last week on the phone. Nice to see you in person. Yeah.
And Heath, as irony would have it, you and I interviewed together on the phone 2 years ago for remember I was doing an MST podcast. We did it over the phone. It was
we have 1 minute to go. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Lauren, are you going to welcome everybody, or Patty or Ariana?
I believe Patty and Ariana are the main hosts, and I'm happy to chime in too.
Yeah, we can do that. So let's see. Do you want to leave everyone who's up currently up for the entirety of the thing, Lauren? Since when we record, it's just gonna go from whoever's speaking to the next person. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
All right, showtime.
All right. Looks like everybody in our waiting room is good to go, so let's get started.
Cool. Just one sec. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a night of storytelling with What a Veteran Looks Like and the Veterans Breakfast Club. My name is Patty Gerhauser. I'm a proud U.S. Navy veteran, a survivor of military sexual trauma, and the co-founder of What a Veteran Looks Like. I will also be serving as one of the moderators for this evening's event. Tonight, we are highlighting the launch of our new podcast entitled My Story. The My Story podcast is part of a larger campaign called Me Too MST, which aims to create a safe and supportive community for survivors of MST to heal from their traumas. Through the My Story podcast, we seek to harness the power of storytelling and collective action by honoring our experiences of friendly fire in the U.S. military, advocating for change, and fighting for justice. Tonight, you might hear us use the term friendly fire frequently. It is one that we use at What a Veteran Looks Like to describe experiences of military sexual trauma, also known as MST. This term is fitting because of the interpersonal and intra-command nature of sexual trauma we often see in the military. Many times, the perpetrators of MST are our battle buddies, our shipmates, our chiefs, our commanders, people who are supposed to have our backs and look out for us, but instead abuse their power and positions to prey upon the men and women serving alongside them. In addition to highlighting the epidemic of military sexual trauma, we also want to raise awareness about its association with suicide risk among our service members and veterans. As many of you may be aware, September is National Suicide Prevention Month. VA research has consistently shown that experiences of MST are associated with suicide risk, even when controlling for comorbid mental health conditions. Military sexual trauma is also frequently associated with other known risk factors for suicide, including depression and substance use disorders. To give you an idea of the statistics associated with veteran suicide, I have suicide rates from 2017. Among women veterans, they were 2.2 times the rate versus non-veteran women, and male veterans were 1.3 times higher the rate than their non-veteran male counterparts. I think it's important to highlight, and we are going to highlight through our panel this evening, that military sexual trauma does not just happen to women service members. It is also something that happens many times to the male veterans, male service members in the military as well. Another thing I'd like to highlight before we kick off here is that MST and the mental health conditions that often stem from military sexual trauma are what we refer to as invisible wounds. They are not something that can typically be seen, but they affect the survivors deeply, both mentally and physically, as you'll hear tonight. Tonight we have a panel of military veterans who are also survivors of military sexual trauma. They will share with us about their experiences in the military, as well as highlight their post-military journeys of recovery and healing. Some of the content covered in this evening's program may be triggering to members of our audience. If you need to talk with someone while listening to the panel discussion or after the event, please call the Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. I will also put this number into the chat feature here on Zoom for your reference throughout the event. As we get started, I'd like to introduce to you my co-host for this evening's event, Ariana Hunter. Ariana is an Army veteran of the Iraq War. She is also the co-founder of What a Veteran Looks Like, a survivor of MST, and my very best friend. Ariana?
Thanks, Patty. It's so good to be here with you all tonight. And it's my distinct honor to be the moderator this evening with this great panel that we have of survivors. But to kick us off, I am very excited to introduce Brittany Chantal. So Brittany is a hip hop artist, a visual artist, a speaker, an activist. And I have to say, since I met Brittany, I have been inspired by her. I've been inspired by how she takes this wonderful and great combination of art and action and really just creates a positive change no matter where she goes. So it's my honor to introduce to you, and she's going to be joining us tonight to perform not only her original song called #MeToo, but be a part of this panel. So Brittany, if you would love to kick us off with your song.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those kind words, Ariana. I put out a hip hop album in February of this year, actually, all about my military experience. And a lot of those songs are related to MST and to what I experienced. And one of the things that I found with the Me Too movement is a lot of folks on Instagram or Twitter kind of showing support, but I felt like they really weren't grasping the heaviness of the situation and of the stories that they were reading. And then also, of course, as I think many of us can attest to, we've also seen a lot of hate and a lot of judgment. And so you'll understand why I said the things that I say in this song. I decided to perform this song tonight a cappella, and I'm going to slow it down a little bit because I really want people to listen to the words that I'm saying and not be so focused on a beat, which is a lot of times what hip hop is. But without further ado, this is #MeToo. Yeah, I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. Yeah, cause it's like me too with the hashtags like, oh yeah, let me snap that, let me cap that, retweet like that, love that. Brittany, did you see this? Oh me, oh my, go retweet this, but for what though? For awareness and all fairness. Yeah, I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. Cause it ain't about the way it happened. It ain't about the story. It's about the fact that it so often yet gets swept under the rug. And the victims get your judgment when they really need your love. Tell me if you get it. This isn't just for mentions. Tell us how you'd feel if this happened to your missus. And it's crazy how awareness turns to begging for attention. Yes, we're begging. We just need you all to listen without tension. I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand what I'm talking about. No, I don't think you understand. Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all tuning in, and you can find my music anywhere, Spotify, Apple Music. I highly suggest y'all just listen to the full album. If you're a veteran, if you have family in the military, I feel like anybody can relate, honestly.
Thank you so much, Brittany. It's one of my favorite albums right now. I think my kids have listened to me play it on repeat. That's what happens in my house, is that I start to like feel something and I listen to it all the time. But it is so powerful, and your words really just hit home with me, right? So thank you for taking the time to sing to us tonight. You are amazing, even a cappella. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We've got this really great panel for you. We've got Brittany Chantal, Lauren Ricci, Heath Phillips, and Christy Hudson. I'm going to ask each of them to take a couple of minutes and just introduce themselves to this group of folks, because I know some of you may know us and there's some new faces tonight. So Lauren, you are our constant face here at our VBC events, and so many people know and love you, and I do very much. But if you could take a few moments first and kind of kick us off and tell us about yourself, tell us about your time in the service, what branch you served, when you served, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks. And I love you too, Ariana. And Brittany, that was amazing. I'm definitely going to check it out. And yes, my name's Lauren Ricci. I serve as the Associate Director for the Veterans Breakfast Club. We collaborated tonight with What a Veteran Looks Like and Me Too MST to obviously bring awareness and create awareness to what it looks like kind of in the life of a military sexual trauma survivor. Yeah, so I'm really happy, that my organization and What a Veteran Looks Like came together to do this. I joined the Navy in 2000. I served until 2003. I was a machinist mate aboard both the USS Blue Ridge and the USS Nimitz. So it's been about 20 years since I joined the Navy. So I've been out for quite a while, but that time has not lessened my passion and my dedication to the veterans, our stories, and, creating the communities of listening like we do here at VBC and with What a Veteran Looks Like. So thanks for including me tonight. And I look forward to meeting everyone else on the panel.
Thanks, Lauren. Next, I'd like to introduce Heath Phillips. Heath, if you could tell us a little bit about when you joined, what branch you served in, and what brought you here tonight.
Hi, everybody. My name's Heath Phillips. So I joined in 1988, which, yes, I mean, I'm old. I joined at 17, a few days after my 17th birthday. I was actually in boot camp. My first duty station on board a ship, I spent a period of 10 months dealing with 6 guys doing all sorts of horrific things to me that were not fun. And I spent 20 years stuck in a bottle from it. 2009, I've been sober since. Since then, I've been a very outspoken advocate on the change in the culture. I go to military installations all over the world. I do virtual trainings now that we have this lovely COVID. I go to Washington, D.C. I help get legislation moved, and I help create new legislation to help survivors, LGBTQ community, because that is one of the forgotten communities. And I do some things with women's health, because a lot of people, even though they associate sexual assault, they don't associate it with a woman's health aspect. And being the only son and the baby, I get it. What brought me here is, I don't know, a friend of a friend who introduced, and I actually know some of you, so it's kind of cool. And I'm very honored to be here.
No, thanks, Heath. It's one of the things I continue to learn as a part of this military veterans community. No matter where you live, no matter what community you're in, we all kind of come back together. It's the biggest small world I've been a part of. Brittany, if you want to talk a little bit about your service, why you joined, when you joined, and anything else you'd like to share about your story initially, kind of introduce yourself to the group.
Totally. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Brittany Chantal. I was in the Army National Guard. I joined in 2011, fresh out of high school, and I got out in 2018. In a bittersweet way, I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia after pretty shortly after a military sexual trauma experience. So, you know, I really wanted to get out, honestly, because my trauma, you know, started right in basic training. So, you know, getting diagnosed with fibromyalgia and getting med boarded was honestly bittersweet. A lot of people say that they're, you know, really sorry that I have fibro, but, you know, it's definitely affected my life in really negative ways, but it was, you know, sort of my ticket out of the military. I joined for a lot of different reasons, but mainly I was in Marine Corps JRTC whenever I was in high school. And I think that, you know, that combined with coming from a military family and, you know, lots of pressure on what to do after high school, if I'm going to college, how I'm going to pay for that. You know, I think all of those things, you know, kind of combined, just pushed me into the, you know, into going to the military route. Now I dedicate my time to, you know, trying to inform mostly students, but also parents and guidance counselors, teachers, the realities of the military, and, you know, try to just express my real lived stories so that students have a better understanding of what they could be getting into. I'll never tell somebody not to join, but I do believe that, you know, people aren't as informed going in as they should be. So I try to change that.
So you're the honest counterpart to the recruiter.
I was just going to say the same thing, Patty.
Yeah, I think recruiters hate me, but that's all right.
It's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Brittany. And then last but certainly not least, Christy Hudson. Christy, if you want to just introduce yourself, the work you do, why you're joining us tonight, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christy, and it's a real honor for me to be here today, first of all, and to be invited to do this. I work at a vet center, which is part of the VA, but different than the hospital-based system. And I got into this work I've been working with survivors of sexual violence for my entire career, and that's been about 13 years now. I started out in civilian world, and I got into the VA side of the world. It's been quite an education. I've been there for about 3 years, and it is you know, it's where I found my calling. And Patty and Ariana invited me here today to bring some you know, kind of the clinical perspective on some of the issues that survivors struggle with, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, and you know, just being a survivor of betrayal trauma and interpersonal trauma, and all of the things that go with that, and people's road to recovery and what recovery can look like. So that's why I'm here today. And again, I'm just really glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. So, you know, I really want to just kind of kick us off in talking about our traumas, and we don't have to be specific here, but like when your trauma happened, you know, who did you first disclose to, and how did that work for you? I know everyone has a different story about that. So I'll start with Lauren. Lauren, when you, you know, tell us a little bit about your experience with your trauma, and then how you disclosed, and maybe how that impacted you personally.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Ariana. So it was a long road. After it happened, I was 18 years old. I was freshly arrived to my first duty station in Yokosuka, Japan. And there was a command picnic where basically, you know, all of our division was there. And I was 18. I wasn't, really a seasoned drinker at the time, but the Navy taught me that pretty quickly. But yeah, I actually, was intoxicated, and my chiefs said he was taking me and another shipmate back to the ship. It almost seemed like normal, like everyone was just having a lot of fun. And I said, I'll go back. Yes, of course, and he took me and another male shipmate back to the pier. And I remember kind of waking up, coming to like in the car, and seeing them walk up the pier and thinking, oh, maybe he's just taking us one at a time up there or something. And then when the chief came back to the car, I was kind of in and out of consciousness, sort of. And he did not take me back to the ship. That's not where he took me that afternoon. And so that is kind of my way that I've figured over the years to, leave that all up to the imagination of the listener. I think that it does more harm than good to talk about details in any sense. So, and the reason I frame it that way, and the reason I introduce the MST in that way, is because we talk about a lot of camaraderie, both in the military and out, and trusting the people that you serve with, especially your superiors. So, there was no reason to think that I shouldn't take a ride home from the superior, from my chief, and that he wouldn't just take me back to the ship, because, whatever. So I didn't disclosed within a couple of days. So there wasn't time to go to medical and get a kit. I was kind of scared. I didn't really know what to do, but eventually I did go, and I told a HM2 in the Navy. HM is hospital mate, corpsman. I went up and I disclosed to someone there what happened. And he immediately said, when did it happen? I said, not anytime soon, because they wanted to collect, some evidence of the incident. But, unfortunately, I didn't respond quick enough. So from that day on, I think my service really changed. Up until then, in school and training, I had always kind of emerged as this natural leader, whether I liked it or not. I graduated second in my class in A school. And, after, getting to the ship, I quickly, made rank as a female machinist mate. I put on my crow pretty quickly. And, that all went very, very differently after the trauma. So once I initially disclosed to the corpsman, he helped me in many ways. And then those disclosures went up and up and up the chain of command. And it took a while for me, to be heard and to have any sort of real response. So, I mean, I don't know how far you want to get into like that, but I did disclose while I was still attached, to the command, back in 2001.
Yeah. I mean, thank you, first of all, Lauren, for sharing your story. I know how hard it is. And I'm just incredibly grateful for you and your honesty, because this is not easy stuff, right? Like, this is stuff that's really hard. And I know that disclosure part, like I said, happens very differently. For me, it was like 17 years before I told a soul, right? So a lot of us go through different ways of opening up and who we can trust. And so I'm just grateful that you are in a point within your recovery now that you're opening up to this group of people. So thank you, because sharing these stories are really impactful and really helpful in having other people outside of this group understand what this means. So thank you.
Thank you, Ariana.
Yeah. I think that it's one of those things that's very hard to hear sometimes, especially from people that we love so much, and especially on this call where people know and love you and all the work that you've done, but you're a tireless advocate. So thank you, really. Brittany, I know that you spent a number of years in the Army National Guard, and I know that your song and a lot of your writing within your lyrics, as people will get to hear your music, really kind of touch on your experiences. Can you share a bit about your trauma, as much as you want to share, and maybe the first time you disclosed to folks?
Yeah, sure. There was multiple points throughout my career, my 7 years and so odd months where I've experienced MST. So, I people have asked me, is there going to be a second album about my military experience? And it's kind of unfortunate, but I think there has to be in order for me to tell every single story that has happened to me. But one that I do talk about on the album is one from AIT, which for non-Army folks is Advanced Individual Training, where you learn your job, the ins and outs of your job. And I went in as a 25 Lima, which is a cable systems maintainer installer. I climbed telephone poles. That's all that means. And I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia for AIT, and quickly realized a lot of different things. Very quickly, I felt unsafe there. There were specifically women in my barracks who were a couple classes ahead of me, or they were in different signal classes, other than my job specifically. And they kind of gave very thinly veiled threats of like, hey, if you don't do XYZ, then this is going to happen. And we've seen it happen. And just, go with the flow and do what you're told. And then there won't be any issues and we won't have to face, different consequences in XYZ. And I really didn't know what they were talking about at all. And I just didn't think that something like what I experienced and to the depth of what I experienced could even be true within the military. And especially given, the Army values and whatnot. But to make a long story short, there are several schoolhouses that specifically 25 Lima MOS goes through, and you cycle through them. And if memory serves me correctly, I think it's 4 different schoolhouses, and each schoolhouse has different cadre instructing you. And so the first schoolhouse is where you learn the basics. You learn how to climb a telephone pole. You don't learn anything else besides, you don't learn anything electrical or anything like that. And when you get into the schoolhouse, you sign a roster and you put your cell phone number and you put your email address and your name. And then it started to get weird. And cadre was taking pictures of us saying, oh, this is just going to help us remember your names and to your faces. And they had us write our name and our phone number on a sheet of paper and hold it up. And then the cadre had us, stand there and they took pictures of us on their personal cell phones. And I think a lot of us didn't think anything of that, didn't think that that was weird. I've had teachers do similar things, in middle school and stuff. And give it a couple days and then text messages started to show up. And it was a lot based on, getting off post, having fun, going to the bowling alley. Cadre knew that we had different levels of being able to get off the base. So, your first 3 weeks there, you're not able to go off base on the weekends. And then depending upon if your class behaves and does well, etc., then you get more, leniency on leaving posts and going places. So the cadre knew that, and they knew that, it's our summer and we're also trying to have fun, and they took advantage of that. And they would say, meet me outside of the PX and I'll give you a ride to the bowling alley and I'll pay for your lane or something like that. Or, you did really well in class today as a congratulations for scoring 100 on that test. Let me buy you a beer, or let me do this. And those kind of nice messages are what you would expect, oh, okay, this cadre member cares about me. It turned really, really bad. And without getting into too many details, some unsolicited nude pictures started to come through. Then the threats came through, and especially once our privileges got extended to being able to go off post on the weekend, it was a lot of, well, hey, I know a taxi is $45 to go to the Augusta Mall. You can just hop into my car at the PX and I'll drive you to the mall. And, I'll pay for your shoes and I'll pay for this, and da 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 da. And things happened in the mall parking lot. And yeah, they were not okay at all. So that's just, a very shortened version of the story. I mean, I was there for 13 weeks. And there were classes before me and women that I met before me, and there were classes after me. So yeah, that's my like biggest experience, I think.
Did you ever disclose to anyone about what you saw or knew or found out?
Yeah, we definitely talked about it as a group. I had, a group of battle buddies, and we were all experiencing the same thing. And we talked about it as a group. And what kept us from moving forward with making an actual report was one of the women that was in a class ahead of us. She actually went missing for a full 24 hours, which if anybody knows, I'm sure we all know here about Vanessa Guillen. That story was extremely triggering for me because on a lot of notes, it's really relatable. Anywho, she went missing for a full 24 hours, and this was during the weekend. And on Sunday night formation, when everybody is supposed to report back, she was late for formation, but approached formation running and crying. And she then reported something happening at the mall parking lot and as well as the bowling alley. And they did a thorough investigation, supposedly, and it came back that that she was lying and all this, that she made things up and she dragged other people into it because she was jealous. I mean, there was a lot of different rumors that spread around, and eventually she got pulled from her class and was not recycled and was left to just honestly chain smoke cigarettes in the smoke pit and get thrown on cleaning duties. So we saw that and we said, well, we want to get out of here as soon as possible. We don't want to be here longer than 13 weeks and we want to graduate, and we want to graduate on time. The majority of us had college to go to and live our lives when we get back. A lot of us were National Guard soldiers, and we just, it didn't seem like it was worth the risk to report, which is really sad.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story, Brittany. One of the things that I think it's important for this audience to know is that MST, like the definition of MST, is everything from sexual assault to, acts of sexual harassment. And that's how the VA defines it. So it's important to kind of recognize that there are opposite ends of the spectrum. And I will say that there were moments within my own personal journey in the military that, things would happen. Whether it was personal quick story is that like I was out to the field with a bunch of guys that I, in my platoon, and they were all, ass grabbing and doing whatever else. And they threw me over their shoulder, and a number of them came behind and like smacked me on my ass. And I will say that at that moment, I didn't really think of that as assault. I didn't think of that as harassment, because there is a culture in the military that makes you think that that's okay and that's expected. And so I hope that tonight you all, as you hear these stories, as you hear from our survivors on this panel, that you recognize that you might have that change in thought, or something that you experienced, or something that happened to you that you actually didn't qualify or think of as being MST may actually be MST. So I'll just kind of reiterate that if something like that is triggering for you tonight, please reach out to resources, whether it's the Veterans Crisis Line, or give one of our vet centers a call tomorrow. This may be a lot, and you may be hearing things that for the first time in your life start to make sense. So thank you, Brittany, for kind of bringing up some of these other spectrums that I think are really important to remember. Heath, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm happy that we have you on the panel tonight. When people think about MST, they often forget that men have a high rate of military sexual trauma. within their service. And so I'm glad that you're here, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and maybe the first time that you disclosed to someone.
I actually disclosed the whole 10 months. Chain of command, master at arms, always called liar, mama's boy. My favorite from my XO is I must have gay fantasies. I had 6 guys assaulting me, and I ended up going AWOL. We had a congressional investigation conducted while I was AWOL. While I was AWOL, 2 of my 6 guys were actually charged with raping 17 other men on board. They got bad conduct discharges and 60 days in the brig. One of my assaulters had been accused of similar behavior at the prior duty station, but this was the kicker. This is actually what my command wrote. Due to my age, I was confused by what he was doing to me. My command just had a blind eye to everything, and I didn't know when I was AWOL, and I didn't know that these guys had been charged with all this other stuff for anything due to me. I just knew something happened, and I'll be honest with you, so I spent my 20 years thinking I was alone, didn't think anybody else ever had this happen to them. The hazing factor for me was just as bad as the rapes, because as I'm being assaulted and hazed, as they were calling it, all my other shipmates were laughing and joking, and it was funny. And I share this to people all the time. It's not funny for the victim. You know, if you're not in that shoes, it is not funny. It's not fun, and it's not enjoyable. For 20 years, oh my God, I was a wreck. When I became sober in 2009, that's actually when I started learning all the other aspects that, yeah, I may have reported, but this is why they didn't do anything. And it took actually, and I'm not trying to down the VA, but it took the VA to make me mad, to actually make me as vocal as I am now. I was kicked out of the military with an other than honorable discharge. I needed mental health help, couldn't get it. Started getting it, VA took it away, made me mad. I became one of the few to ever be service connected for post-traumatic stress disorder with an other than honorable discharge. I did my own case, I fought it, took me 5 years. Just shy of 29 years, the Navy finally sent me an apology letter actually admitting that it happened and gave me a full honorable discharge. But it took, almost 29 years. And I just, I hear everybody's stories, and all our stories are the same. They're not the same, but they're the same, and I think for me, what a lot of people seem to not think about when it comes to us is the trauma aspect. And that trauma causes so many different things to different people. Yes, we all have a trauma, but I handle things differently than you're going to handle it. And I think for me, also, the other thing that bothers me, even though I've reported and even though I kept saying it, being called a liar was also just as traumatizing as my assaults. So today, even though I go to counseling, and being called a liar is still a trigger for me. It really, really bothers me that especially when I know I'm not lying. It's like, what do you mean? So being able to come on things like this has actually been, also I go to the bases and speak and colleges and umpteen weird media stuff. And for me, that has been very healing. I'm not healed. I don't think I'll ever be healed, but I've been able to put one step forward every day and still keep moving forward. And being on this panel, seeing all these wonderful people, knowing that they're doing the same thing, going forward, moving. It gives me so much hope, and I'm inspired by it. And Brittany, I actually, while we were talking, was looking up all your stuff like really fast. It's amazing. I can't wait to listen to it. Lauren, I met you 2 years ago, and we're all change makers in a different direction, but we're all inspired to make change. And I think that for me is the most admirable thing I could get from this. And I know I'm like a squirrel and I like go all over the place, but
no, Heath, it's great. And right here's the thing is like you talk about that trauma, right? You talk about how you've overcome, you're overcoming, right? But you're still in therapy. I mean, I'm still in therapy. I think most of us are, right? Like that's part of recovery is this continual, working on ourselves. But I think what's really interesting that you kind of brought up is this idea of growth. And Christy, I'm going to kind of tap on you here a bit, because I'd love for you to talk about, right? We've got Brittany over here who's doing really great work in activism and the arts, and Lauren and all her activism within her own space and the work that she's been doing for years, and Patty and myself and Heath, right? Like there's this idea of post-traumatic growth. And I'd love for you to kind of give insight to the participants that are listening in today and those that may hear the recording later about how post-traumatic growth is something that survivors kind of go through.
Sure, I'm happy to address that. I think it's a really important concept. We hear a lot about post-traumatic stress and the toll that takes on, individuals and the systems that they live in and operate in every day. Post-traumatic growth is not a new concept, but it is something that we're newer to talking about as a community, in the trauma treatment and recovery community. And the basic idea is that something really horrific can happen to you and you can grow as a person from it through your recovery process. And that maybe you might not have had some of those opportunities to grow were it not for your experiences. Now, that does not in any way suggest that those weren't awful, traumatic, and at times devastating experiences. But what it does suggest is that it's not all bleak, that there are some gifts in trauma. I tell people this all the time. I've been doing this work for 13 years. And if I didn't think that there was another side of this, if I didn't think that you could heal and rebuild your life and pick up the pieces and have meaningful experiences, there's no way in hell I'd do this. I wouldn't torture somebody like that. You've been through enough. And so that's really, it's everybody that's, from, Ariana and Patty, you two organizing this panel and the work that you're doing with What a Veteran Looks Like and the hashtag #MeTooMST project, and Lauren and Brittany and Heath, the ways that you are, like how Heath, you said, each of you are taking it up in a different way and advocating for your community in a different way. You're all shining examples of post-traumatic growth. That is what it looks like. That what you're doing is what it looks like. And it's powerful. And when we come together as a community, I think we can really be a force to reckon with.
Thanks,
Christy. I want to add something too, real quick, Ariana. Something that Heath said kind of stood out to me. He said, he thought he was the only one, or he thought that he was alone in his experience for so long. And that's something that I can definitely relate to. And I think, there's a lot of shame that surrounds these types of experiences for the survivors. There's a lot of shame in not finishing your enlistment. There's a lot of shame in receiving an other than honorable discharge for something that was not your fault and something that you could not control. And I think that shame keeps a lot of people from sharing their stories and speaking out. And while I understand that, because I know how hard it is as a survivor myself, I think it's really important to the healing process to know that other people have these similar experiences. It's not just you. It kind of validates what I've always found very hard to believe, that I'm not at fault for any of it. None of this is my fault. It's not my shame to bear, right? And that's kind of, what drives me to do this kind of work and to help people to share their stories and to, just talk about MST in general, is so that people won't feel that way, the way that I did for so many years. And I'm sure you're all nodding at me. I'm sure you can all relate to that as well. And so thank you, Heath, for noting that in your experience, because I think that's a really important thing to touch on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm actually glad that you said that last piece too, because that is something that I tell people all the time. It's amazing that I'm not the only one that thinks it. So thank you.
And that's Patty. I mean, that's a great reason to kind of talk about the Me Too MST campaign, right? So we are launching this campaign tonight with this panel. But really what it is if you go to metoo-mst.com, you have the opportunity to share your story, and you can do so anonymously, and you can do it in any way that you feel is important to you. So if you're an artist like Brittany and you have written a song or a poem or even like drawn artwork, you can submit that right online anonymously and share your story that way. Or you can, just like on this panel, tell your story verbally and upload it or write it out, right? So I think that's what's really great about this opportunity, is that we'll post those and we'll post them anonymously, but then it will allow for, if you so choose, right? You can put your name to it if you want. But it allows for this greater community of people to recognize that they are not alone and that there are so many of us, and you can start to relate to others. So yeah, that's a really great point, Patty and Heath. Thank you for talking about it, because that's really I think the catalyst for all of this is that we want folks to know that they are not alone, that this is unfortunately something that has happened to so many of us who have served. So with that, I kind of wanted to talk about maybe how your trauma either impacted your physical or mental health, and maybe your first step to recovery, what that recovery looked like for you at the time. Lauren, I'll kind of start with you. If you want to chat a little bit about, maybe how your trauma impacted your physical or mental health, and what that recovery process looked like for you. You're on mute still, Lauren.
Yeah, when I first got out, I went home to New Jersey. I made a few pit stops along the way. I almost didn't want to go home because, another level to my story, and it affected me mentally, in a big way, was that, when it was time for me to be separated with, my beautiful other than honorable discharge, which, my father came to the base and he surprised me, and he forced me to escort him on the base. And he met with my entire command, and and I think someone said, I think it was you, Heath, that no one believes you. Well, my own father didn't believe what had happened. And it was he met with my captain and my chain of command and went into this big room, and I had to stand outside and basically wait while they decided my future, and they decided my life. So I almost tried not to go back home to New Jersey. I stopped at a friend's house in Colorado. I stopped at my aunt's house in Topeka because I couldn't, believe, and that just completely changed the dynamic, of my family. My parents ended up getting divorced shortly after, and my younger sister was struggling with things. So home was not a welcoming and fun place to return to, which, made it harder. One thing about me is that I did talk about it early, and I got voc rehab. I got service-connected disability kind of on the front end of leaving. I think I remember getting that first letter in the mail. It was 30% disability. So I would get my little $300 a month or whatever it was, and go to the VA and talk about it. But I always stayed in school, or I was always working. So I was working at a bank. I was waitressing. I was kind of, doing whatever I could to keep busy and to focus. I did that for a while. And I think, one thing that happened to me was all sense of a timeline just kind of disappeared. People, if someone asked me, what were you doing in 2004, I'll really have to think about it. 2005, 2006, those immediate years after when I got out are very blurry, and that timeline's hard to piece together. What I do know is, after moving to probably like 5 different major cities over that time, is that I always say I got really lucky with the school that I got accepted to Rowan University, and I got lucky because they had a wonderful veterans support office on campus. And I started up their student veteran organization there and got involved with local nonprofits that were veterans in education. And I think that is where, actually not the recovery, but, the switch was flipped, I'm still recovering, I'm still healing, but that's when things began to change for me. So it took probably, 7 years or something, 6 or 7 years for me to get to a point where I was stable enough to pursue a 4-year degree and then continue on, getting my master's using the GI Bill, which inevitably landed me here in Pittsburgh. So it took a good amount of time, and I'm still working on it.
Well, I'm glad you're in
Glad
Pittsburgh.
you landed in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. That's the one thing we always say about the veterans community here in Pittsburgh is that it's unique to any other city or town I've ever lived in. So we're super grateful to have you here, Lauren. So Brittany, I want to chat with you a little bit about, you talked a little bit about your fibromyalgia diagnosis coming on very shortly after your MST. But can you talk about maybe how your MST affected your physical or mental health and, what your first steps in recovery looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still putting together the timeline, so many things happened in what feels like such a short time frame. And, I had 3 specific MST experiences throughout my 7 years and some months. And they all affected me differently. I do think, after the first one happening in basic training, I was coming back and I did the split option program where I did, basic training the summer after graduating high school. And then I came home for my first year of college. And then the next summer leading into my sophomore year of college, I went to AIT. So that freshman year, when I came back from basic training, I was doing a lot of drinking, as, a lot of people do in college. Doesn't make it okay though. And, also obviously I was underage drinking, and got myself into a lot of situations that, I not necessarily blaming alcohol for, but, I made a lot of poor decisions. So that was, kind of the first thing that how the MST affected me. And then, fast forwarding to 2016, when I was at basic officer leadership course in Fort Lee, Virginia, a fellow lieutenant assaulted me, and almost the next day, my entire body was completely in pain. And a lot of people, I think, have a really difficult time imagining what that means, because when I say entire body, I literally mean that. From my scalp, I have fibromyalgia still currently, so if you touch my scalp, it hurts me. If you touch my foot, it hurts me. So, along with the full body pain that I woke up with the next day, I noticed that I didn't get much sleep. I noticed that I was foggy. I had brain fog. And I mean, all of these symptoms came on so quickly. I didn't really know why. I didn't even know what fibromyalgia was at the time. It was a weekend, and I waited for Monday to go to sick call, and I went to sick call and explained to them my symptoms, and the nurses actually laughed at me. They kept asking me, "How old are you? How old are you?" And when did you graduate college? Did you play sports in college? Did you ever feel like this in college? And it was just so such a horrible experience to happen 2 days after being assaulted, to be laughed at by nurses and not believe that I'm in the pain that I'm in. Simply because what it seems like is just because of my age and how young I look. So they had me come back for testing, and they took a whole bunch of blood and stuff like that. And the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong because there is no test for fibromyalgia that comes up in blood. So they tested me for Lyme's disease. They tested me for so many things. And the doctor, I was a week away from graduation and coming back to Pittsburgh. And the doctor in my last appointment said, well, I don't know what you have. And, the nurse mentioned fibromyalgia, but I don't believe that that's real. I believe that fibromyalgia is diagnosed to people by doctors who can't admit that they don't know what's wrong. So I'm going to admit to you that I don't know what's wrong with you, but I think you might have leukemia. Yeah. And the clinic was closing in 10 minutes. And he was like, I just sent your prescription over to the pharmacy. And, he was like, you can go pick that up, and you're going to have to, when you get home, you're going to have to see your PCP and talk to them about more testing around leukemia. So I just was like, it happened so fast, and I left, and I got a big brown paper bag of medicine and of a mixture of things that quite honestly could have killed me. And I went back to my room and cried in the shower because I thought that I had leukemia. And that was my initial, experience with the physical changes in my body due to trauma.
Wow. Did you ever find that you were, I guess at what point did you, obviously you came home and they realized that it was not leukemia and that you were not sick with cancer and that it was in fact fibromyalgia. But at what point, and maybe this is still new for you, maybe you're still in this point, but at what point were you like, I need other help, right? Like I'm getting my pain under control, my physical health under control, but I still need help in other ways. I guess what was that turning point for you that you recognized that you needed that?
Yeah, totally. I got diagnosed. So I came back from Bowl Lake December 9th, 2016, and I wasn't able to see my PCP until January 2nd. So I got into my PCP. They did blood work. Within 3 days, they told me that I didn't have leukemia. But, that was, over a month that I was legitimately convinced that I was dying. And then I got to go to the Lupus Center of Excellence here in Pittsburgh, which also has some experts in fibromyalgia there. And at the time, this is 2017, they really didn't have much research then, and they're still working on it now. But they were convinced giving me Cymbalta would help my pain. And to which I actually jumped on Facebook and found a fibromyalgia support group, and everyone told me not to do that because it doesn't actually cure fibromyalgia. And so I kind of went on this road of trying to find cures, and I did everything, Pinterest told me. I laugh now, but it was absolutely ridiculous. I was drinking, turmeric water, taking all these things and stuff like that. And I did find herbal medicine, and a lot of herbal medicine helped with the bigger symptoms. But I realized that this is all trauma related. And I think especially it speaks volumes that I hit this level of pain after being, sexually assaulted 3 times. And I kind of made up this analogy, if you will, that it's like the trash that no one wants to take out in the kitchen, and you keep there's something maybe important that you threw away in the trash, and people keep just piling trash on it and they don't want to take it out. And I've recognized that just my body from childhood through the military has just had so much trash put into it in many different ways, and trauma and the way that I ate, et cetera, And I just realized that I need to do some really heavy work, therapy and past self work to dig out this trauma and to feel better. Because I 100% believe that fibromyalgia is trauma related. So it was just kind of like a trial and error thing.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, because I know that so many people have both physical and mental ailments that happen after trauma, and they don't know how to manage them, and they don't know what to do. And so asking for help and seeking help is such an important piece of that. And asking multiple times if someone gives you shitty information, right? Like, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. And I really appreciate that part of your story, is that you like advocated for yourself, even though someone tried to tell you something differently. So thank you for that. So Patty, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to just highlight what Brittany said about when she went to the medical clinic through the military initially, and they just gave you a bunch of medication, just to let people know that that is not uncommon. I can't tell you how many times I saw that being done to my shipmates, and even experienced that myself, where you finally get, sometimes it's a hassle even to get in to be seen by anyone. And then for them to see you one time and send you out the door with 3 to 5 new prescription medications, that have their own side effects and interact in certain ways. A lot of times it's not very helpful, and it's just kind of putting a Band-Aid on what is actually going on. And to me, it just speaks again to kind of the cover-up culture in the military, where a lot of times the medical community doesn't even respond in a helpful manner to people who are seeking help or treatment because of military sexual trauma or anything else related to the military. I just think that's an important thing to highlight, especially because that's one of the things that recruiters highlight about the military is the free healthcare, but it's not what you think it is sometimes.
I mean, I was not going to say this joke, but I mean, essentially it was like, what did they send Brittany home with? Like just a bunch of ibuprofen, like, 800 milligrams in a brown paper bag, you'll be fine.
Cures everything, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we say it as a joke, but the reality is that's, the reason that we joke about it's because it's so true. I think that it does. Just take some ibuprofen, you'll be fine. No, it's a really good point, Patty. Heath, I'd love to hear more about your story, because I don't know it as well as I know the others, just in terms of, how you navigated your trauma with your physical and mental health, and what your first steps in recovery looked like.
Well, to be honest, I'm still fighting my physical parts. I have a comp and pen or some stupid evaluation tomorrow in Alexandria, Virginia. I have severe TBI. I didn't know what it was. Finally, the VA told me what was wrong, and even though I'm service connected for PTSD, they're now trying to open my PTSD claim and saying TBI is PTSD, and I'm like, oh, totally different. But I have internal issues, intestinal issues, and all that from my rapes. I have a torn right knee from being thrown downstairs, TBI. I got severe tinnitus, a couple of other issues. But for me, getting the mental health part has been like the biggest hurdle for me. It's helped me so much. But now I'm realizing, like I joked earlier, I'm not young. All these other things are really starting to add up and really starting to hurt. And being sober, because I hid in that battle for way too many years. Seeing what the alcohol also did to me, which I didn't come from a drinking family, so for me that the alcohol did a lot to me also. I was the brainiac kid, and now I'm somewhat slow. Sometimes I still slur words, and it is attributed to the alcohol, unfortunately. What was your other question? Sorry.
No, it's okay. The other half of it was just around your recovery, so you kind of going through those those traumas and going through your mental and physical health, what was like your first step into recovery?
Attempting suicide in 2009. I driving drunk, one eye, and I share this story so people actually understand how drunk I really was. I was at the point in my life that not only did I hate myself, I hated everybody, everything. I was so sick, and I literally say I was so sick that I was laughing internally going, ooh, I know where this tree is. Ooh, I'll kill myself. Ooh, I'm going to show them. And then it was, they don't like me around anyway, so maybe I'm not going to show them, but now they don't have to deal with me. This is what my brain was really like. And when I came to, that was when my actually first reality set in, and all them years of living in embarrassment, shame, insecure about my sexuality, second guessing myself, living in my own guilt, thinking I was at fault, all those things adding up to the mental part was, for me, it was the biggest pin that was inside me. And for me to get my growth, I believe it or not, I hate to say this, but I had to forgive my rapists. It wasn't about forgiving myself because I wasn't at fault. It was about forgiving them so I could move forward to get where I am. And now I'm finding physical issues. It's like, oh my God, I got all these things going wrong. And one of my assaults, Brittany, you said it perfectly. So one of my assaults, I actually, not to get into details, but I was sodomized with a utensil that's used in the bathroom. I was bleeding horribly, went to medical, and they told me I had a hemorrhoid. And that's actually what they put in my medical records. And those things, living them over and over and over is a really big mental push. And I thank God today that I'm was able to get into the VA and get the mental health help. I actually don't go to the VA. Christy, I go to the Veterans Clinic. Much better treatment for me. For me being a guy, even though they say that there's a lot of help for us, there really is not. It's really depressing knowing that there's really not a place for male survivors in the mental health area, physical, all that. Mm-hmm. So getting taken care of that and then getting into the physical part has been a huge uphill battle. But to top it off, I was also recently diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So it's like, and they think part of that could be a cause from my military because of all the stupid chemicals that I had to constantly work with. So it's like, can't catch a break. Thank God I don't drink no more.
Well, I will say, Heath, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that your thoughts of suicide in 2009 did not happen, and that you are here and you're able to advocate for this community, but you're also just a wonderful addition to the world. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing your story. And Christy, I want to just kind of give you some time here to talk a bit about recovery, right? I know that this is your day in and day out, and you've heard a number of survivors talk about what they've gone through and where they're at. So I just want to give you some space to say what's on your mind. Sure.
Thanks, Ariana. First of all, Heath, I'm really sorry to hear about your diagnosis, but I suspect you're a fighter. And I in my gut, I feel like you're going to make it through. And you have a community here to support you. So just know that. So a little bit on recovery. So I think people get into a place of finally facing the demons of their trauma when they've tried everything else they can think of, and it all stops working or it falls apart when they run out of options. And whether that's sobriety, trying to, a suicide attempt, any number of ways that survivors, I think, turn to oftentimes self-destruct. And sometimes I know, I've had poignant conversations with both Patty and Ariana about this, that sometimes what self-destruction looks like is working yourself into the ground. And it might look good on paper and you might look very successful. I see you raising your hand, Brittany. But what that really is a way of running from your demons. And so like I said, people finally hit a place of recovery when they run out of options for all the tools that they have at their disposal. And so, it's usually precipitated by some kind of crisis. As humans, we are not really good at getting into a place of change on our own. We usually have to be made to be extremely uncomfortable before we're willing to take that step. And sometimes that discomfort can look alarming to the people on the outside of you. Humans can tolerate a lot of distress when put to the test. But, I think it begins by finding the right fit of, supports. And I know for a lot of sexual trauma and sexual violence survivors, there is both the physical component and the mental health component. Sometimes one comes before the other. Sometimes they emerge at the same time. But I am a huge believer, Brittany, what you were saying about the connection between fibromyalgia and trauma. I am 100% convinced, having done this for 13 years, that autoimmune disorders, migraine disorders, fibromyalgia, GI disorders, that these all can be traced back to traumatic experiences for the vast majority of people who develop these disorders. And there's research that's starting to investigate and support that. And I'm excited to hear, that science is trying to back this, because there's such a relationship between how our minds go and how our minds deal with what's happened to us and how that gets funneled into the body. I mean, it's one system, it's going to happen. But anyway, so that's a sidebar. I could go on about that forever. Just in terms of getting into recovery, everybody's recovery starts differently. Sometimes it's about landing in rehab. Sometimes it's about landing in a hospital, being institutionalized. Sometimes it's just a moment of clarity and a realization that what happened to you matters. It affects you. It's running your life and it's running the show. And then until you turn towards it and deal with it, you're going to keep being on the losing end of that battle. And, from that point forward, for those of you on the call or that watch this later or that are on, Facebook that are listening to this, there are a lot of supports out there, and not all of them are a good fit for you. And you have a right to the right supports that are working for you. And, I always, it's kind of a little tongue in cheek, but I always liken your treatment, your therapy relationship to a dating relationship, right? You're not going to marry the first person you go on a date with. And so why should you commit to a therapeutic relationship, which is can be an invaluable tool in your recovery? Why would you commit to the first person that you necessarily come across? If it doesn't feel right, trust your gut. A big part of recovery, as a survivor in particular, is beginning to pay attention to that quiet voice inside of you and that feeling in your gut, because that's what you had to shut down to survive. You had to shut off your alarm system to survive. And so now you have to learn how to turn it back on, and then learn the difference between your trauma brain responding from an old place and what's really going on in the here and now environment. And it's a process. And then it's also a process of learning how to cope differently and to let go of things that maybe don't serve you anymore, whatever that is. Whether it's drinking too much, working too much, sleeping too much, gambling too much, whatever. There's an infinite number of ways that we can self-destruct in the face of trauma. And the other thing that I'll say about it, and these are kind of like the basic highlights. I mean, recovery is often a lifelong process, and everybody here has said, I'm in recovery. I don't know that there's a recovered place. I think it's a lifelong process. I think you can make some really great strides. You can have a period of, relative, internal and external harmony. But, it's my opinion and experience that once you have post-traumatic stress disorder, you're going to always have those neural pathways in your brain, and you're going to resort to them in times of great distress. It's just how humans are wired. It is not your fault. And you're stuck with it and figuring out what to do with it. That's, it's shitty and it's unfair. But, you can be mad about it, or you can figure out how to work with it. And I think, I've met some of the most amazing human beings I've ever met are trauma survivors. And people in recovery, and it's always an honor for me to do a part of the journey with them. So that's sort of the broad brushstrokes that I
appreciate that. No, thank you, Christy. So last question before we kind of open this up to a couple of questions from the audience, those that are participating. So if you do have a question and you're on the call, please feel free to put it in the chat. It will come to me. And then we'll be able to ask the panelists about it as long as we have time. So Lauren, this first question I have here for you before we get to the Q&A portion is, how has your life changed since you started recovery?
I just feel relieved of a lot of like the blame and the fault. For me, it was like I always carried that. For years, I would like accept the money, that the VA, they give you the disability compensation. And I would say, I'm just doing this because that's the only thing they have to offer me, right? From everything. And I actually didn't even believe that I was sick for the longest time. I just, when someone would say like, oh, what do you, why are you retired? Why do you still, ask a seemingly normal question? I never really resonated. I didn't believe it that I was sick or that I had PTSD. So it was just like this label that I just kind of like carried along with me, but I never like put it on, and that changed, after my suicide attempt, in 2013. I remember saying, oh, there's definitely something going on here. So I think, since then, and that's hard to talk about. Like, I don't want anyone who knows me or, is on this call or whatever, thinking that I'm, over here in a bad place, because I'm not, because of all the amazing services and all the outlets and things that we have available to us here, and specifically in this veterans group. But what changed most for me in the recovery was being able to accept that diagnosis, understand that there was nothing that I did wrong, no matter what the discharge says, no matter what, that I absolved myself of the blame. And so little by little, I think over time, but maybe by the time the end of my life is over, I might be back to my normal self, because I feel like it happened so epically slow with me. But I think what changed the most was hitting that bottom in 20, and then working with the right therapist, and her explaining to me that this man was a predator, and looking back and explaining to me, something where I have virtually no memory, but I know that it happened because of certain things, explaining to me that I was assaulted, that just because, there wasn't a knife to my throat or a gun to my head or something, that it wasn't a rape or an assault, that it actually happened and that it wasn't my fault. So I think that has probably been the most important part of that for me.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't your fault, and you were not alone.
And I want to say too, Lauren, I didn't know you prior to your assault, but I like Lauren now.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I wouldn't be totally heartbroken if you never made it back to normal, Lauren, because I like where you are right now.
That's sweet, Patty. Thanks.
Brittany, I have a different question for you. What has been the biggest barrier or hurdle that you've come across in pursuing recovery?
I think, I don't know if this is like the biggest, but it's just one that has been very, very relevant, like very, how should I say this? This issue has been popping up a lot in my road to recovery. And it's an issue that I didn't think would jump into. And it's simply that I identify as a lesbian. I've had now 2 therapists in a row allude to the reason why I am a lesbian is because of my trauma, my sexual trauma. And this is an idea that a lot of people have, not just therapists, but it's an idea that a lot of people have. That in order for you to be queer, to identify as queer, you had to have had some sort of sexual trauma. And a lot of people go back and say childhood sexual trauma. You were touched as a child, and that's why you're queer. And let me just tell y'all real quick. I wouldn't choose to be oppressed more than I already am. All right. I'm biracial. I identify as Black. Yes, I am white presenting. My mother is an immigrant. I'm a woman. I wouldn't choose to be oppressed in one more way. I tried to be straight. I really tried, and it didn't work out. And I'm sorry to the men whose hearts that I broke. It's just, that's a barrier to my recovery. It's like, now I have to start all over with a new therapist. And that's just ridiculous.
Yeah. I feel you on the, like, why add more one thing, right? To be oppressed by. So, but with that, finding the right therapist is hard. And so I don't give up, right? Like, keep trying. Someone, I can't remember who it was. It might have even been you, Christy. It's like you're dating, right? Like, you got to go on that first date and like see if this works out. And if this doesn't work out, like, I'm sorry, this didn't work out. I gotta go find somebody new. So I'm glad that you're still trying, right? Like, I'm glad that you're still out there trying to find a therapist that is right for you and isn't going to say some ridiculous bullshit to you about like why you're queer. So I'm sorry that you've had that experience, but I'm really glad that you're sticking with it. And then lastly, but certainly not least, Heath, I have a different question for you too, but I want to talk to you, or have you kind of talk to this group by giving some advice. You're been around the block a number of years, you've gone through a lot, you've seen a lot. You're testifying before Congress and doing some really amazing things. What advice would you give to someone who hasn't reached out or gotten help yet?
Biggest advice I could tell anybody is not to hold it in. Find some way to do an outlet. There's more than one way to get it off your chest. You can write about it. When I first started doing things, I actually was writing, and I would read what I wrote, and I'd rip it up and I'd throw it away because it was mine and it was gone. And some of the hardest challenges for all of us is trusting somebody, and you have to when the time is right, you'll know it in your heart, and you really will know it when the time is right to say something to somebody to get it off your chest. I tried it when it was happening and was ignored. I held it in for 20 years. Now I scream it to the top of my lungs. So my best advice is please don't hold it in, because that'll destroy you. And my biggest thing is I don't know. I do not want one person to live the life that I lived. And it doesn't matter what I have to share. I'm going to share it to make sure that that keeps staying the way I want.
I think, Heath, I love what you said about, you know, you highlighted it kind of being a process, right? Where, and it's a non-linear process too, which I find incredibly frustrating, but it really is. And you just have to start where and when you feel comfortable in whatever way you feel comfortable, right? And I know Christy and Ariana and I have talked about this in a different platform before, but sometimes, and to Brittany's point with the therapists who tried to make this about your sexuality, sometimes it can be more damaging to share with someone who is not going to be supportive, who is not going to acknowledge your truth, who is not going to be able to help you in the way that you need to be helped. And so if you find yourself in that situation, and it takes so much courage to disclose, and so it's really awful when something like that happens and you find yourself in a situation where you've disclosed to someone who is not supportive or who victim blames or who re-victimizes you. And, you know, I've experienced that myself with a previous therapist where it just wasn't helpful. And my advice in that situation would be, you know, don't let that stop you from pursuing recovery, right? Recognize that, like Christy said, you know, listen to your inner voice, listen to your gut, recognize that that's not helpful, but know that there is something out there for you that will be helpful. You just have to keep looking for it. You just have to keep pursuing it, right? So I think that's an important point to make, Heath, that there's a lot of different avenues and a lot of different ways. Just don't sit on it, right? Don't let it be stuck,
Right.
because it will destroy you.
I think a lot of us forget our gut feelings, because growing up, we had all these gut feelings that something didn't feel right or it wasn't right. And after our trauma happened, we quit listening to that internal gut feeling. And that is where I say you're going to know it when it's in your heart, when you're ready. This doesn't have to be a marathon. You could be like a snail, a turtle. The point is it's a trauma. You can't hold it in. Reach out for help if you need it. And I love what you said, Patty, because I had unhealthy relationships, but I would try sharing with them why I had issues. And boy, that was like some of the worst things, having that thrown back in your face.
Mhm.
And I'm going through a brutal divorce, and that's all her new stuff is now, is all this stuff. And so this is a rough road. It is scary, but I think at the end, the better feelings that you get overrides that scary part. And I'm going to quit talking. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that, Heath, though, right? It's a process, and it's important to kind of just meet people where they are. And I think that's those of you who are on this call who are maybe have survivors in their life, or they work with survivors, meeting them where they are is what we need.
Everything.
Yeah, right. So we only have a few minutes left here.
I have a question that came through. Ellie just sent it to me.
Okay, I have a couple too, so go ahead.
Okay.
Ellie, I can kind of see the chat too, just so you know.
Oh, you can. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
It's okay.
All right, so
Go
the
ahead,
first
Patty.
one I got through here is from Carol. It says, do any of the guests think that the military authorities are truly capable of fairly adjudicating these cases that arise from sexual assault or sexual harassment, or should there be some sort of civilian judicial oversight?
And we'll just let this open up. So if Lauren or Brittany or Heath or anyone would just jump in, feel free to just jump in.
I actually work on this all the time. And I also speak at military installations all the time. And this is actually one of the subjects that comes up. While I don't believe that the command can ever be impartial, what I also know from all the studying and everything I've done, civilians do not know a thing about the UCMJ. So for them to try doing anything in a military fashion is going to be extremely hard. I am personal friends with Kirsten Gillibrand, and some of the things that her and I have sat down and talked about was having a partnering system and have it kind of like what they're doing now, but the command is overseen by the civilian sector, and they can step in and take over if they don't see the impartiality going on. If they see, oh, that's my buddy. My other issue with speaking at bases is commanders' biggest fears is if Congress and Senate takes this away from us, what are they going to strip us from next? But I also get it because commanders weren't trained to handle cases. They were trained to take us to war. So there has to be a fine line. But that's my 2 bits on it, since I've been around for a while.
Is it okay if I jump in for a second? I worked in both the civilian side and on the veteran side, not on the military side. But what I will say to that question is that the civilian side doesn't have a great track record either. And this issue is so much bigger. The why it is the way it is so much bigger than just how the justice system is structured, or how the military is structured to deal with it. I mean, this has big, broad cultural. There's so many layers to this that I worry that a civilian oversight isn't really it's not necessarily going to solve the problem. I don't know what the answer is, because that's not my area of expertise in terms of how things might work better in that particular regard. But we need really smart people working on it who understand the implications of trauma. Because if we just try to have the civilian side step in as is, I don't think it's going to make a difference.
Thanks, Christy. And I know that we are right up on time, but I want to ask one more question to the panelists before we wrap up. And with that, if those of you have to jump off, I appreciate you coming on. Recognize that we are launching a podcast as a part of this story of Me Too MST and my story. We'll be actually kicking off with Lauren's podcast this Wednesday. And you'll be able to find it on Spotify and iTunes, SoundCloud. So be on the lookout for the My Story podcast. They will be every other week on Wednesdays, again, starting with Lauren. So the last question here I'd like to just ask the panel is from Kathy. And her question is, what action did any of your chain of commands take to assist with or comply with any of the DoD policy, anything with UCMJ that happened in any of your cases? No.
Nothing. Yeah. I mean, I was transferred, and the chief got promoted, stayed attached to the command. So since mine involved alcohol, they offered me help with my alcoholism, my inevitable, 18-year-old alcoholic self. So that was what they offered. But there was really nothing from like what Kathy was asking about, protocol. There was no protocol to be followed. Yeah. But I think a lot of times we notice this too, like you as the person, as the victim, they remove us and like sweep it under the rug, change our command, kick us out. Just that's the norm. I think I've found, unfortunately, even to this day, to this very moment, with people serving.
Anybody else want to add anything else to that question? Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to our panelists, Brittany, Heath, Lauren, Christy. It's my honor, day in and day out, to hear your stories and to be a part of this. Thank you to the VBC for giving us this platform and opening this up to this topic, because the more that we talk about this, we will be reducing the stigma around military sexual trauma. And hopefully one day we won't have to talk about it anymore, because it will no longer happen. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out to Patty or myself. Again, you can do so on me2mst.com, what a veteran looks like. And, thank you so much again for all of those who participated this evening. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.